Welcome back to All Terrain Marriages. We're Danny and Stephanie Gutierrez, and this, my friends, is week 8. We're here. Congratulations on having invested this amount of time and intentionality and effort into your marriage. Hey, that's a big deal, and it's worth celebrating. A healthier marriage on the field is going to make you a healthier and a stronger missionary. And hey, that's a win for the kingdom, and that's a win for your family.
You know, before we finish our conversation on our last word narrative, let's take a few minutes to jot a few things down. So right where you're at, take out your notebook, take out a piece of paper, and write down 4 words across the top, and I want you to underline them. So write location, lubrication, navigation, and now write the word narrative. And under each of these words, I'd say almost like a grocery list, just jot down a few things that stood out to you about those times that we had in those sessions. What did you remember the most? Include any impressions you might have, any emotions that you have connected with those words perhaps, or the conversations that you had after each of those sessions. I mean, you can even rank them if you want. Which was the most relevant to your marriage and where you find yourself right now? Which is the one that you'd like to focus on moving forward? So feel free to write down whatever you want. I mean, you can write down, yay, boo. You can put a smiley face if you want to, or double underline the one that you're like, yeah, this is the one that we need to focus on. See, this is your list, so just be sure to write a few things down. You can go ahead and pause the video for just a moment to get that done.
Okay, so as we wrap up this journey we've been on together, we want to take a look today at 3 ways people tell their story and how that impacts their experience of marriage, building on what we talked about last week. So there is this great book on transitions by a man who studied life transitions intensively. And in particular, he's researched the kinds of stories that we tell in the midst of them. And missionaries, I mean, transitions, they're a massive part of our life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this author, Bruce Feiler, he points out that there are 3 kinds of trajectories the stories we tell have. And before we talk about the first one, I think it's worth remembering that in our last session, we did talk about how we decide the way we will remember our memories. We decide what we fill our reservoirs with, because those reservoirs provide us with the raw materials that we use to tell our stories. Well, we also decide the trajectory our stories have. And think of a trajectory as the shape of a line from one point to another. So we don't always decide the events or the circumstances of our lives, unfortunately sometimes we feel like, but we do decide how we will interpret those circumstances for ourselves and how we're going to project that to those around us. So after years of research, Feiler has found that people tell the stories of their life using one of 3 trajectories. There's ascending, there's descending, or there's oscillating. What are they, you say? Well, an ascending story is like this. It's one that goes from bad to good, from rags to riches. You know, we were once poor and destitute, but now we are healthy and wealthy and we will never want again. Or, you know, I remember when we got to the mission field with a suitcase and $100 of mission support, and now our ministry has exploded and grown, and we reach thousands daily, upward and onward. Or our first year of marriage was a hot mess, man. I didn't think we were gonna make it, but now we never fight. We are a couple of the year, and life just keeps getting better and better all the time. Okay. These stories are often told to show a family's grit and strength. Look at what we accomplished, family. Then there's descending stories. Okay, those go in the opposite direction as you would imagine. changed. They go from good to bad. They're ones that are full of nostalgia. Man, they talk about the good old days and they reminisce about what we were way back when. I remember when we had it all until the crash, or the fall, or until we just lost everything in that tragedy. I'm not sure why I'm doing an accent, but it's okay. People have forgotten, but our family used to be something in this town. Or I remember when we first fell in love and we had our whole lives ahead of us. You know, we used to get along so well, but then he changed. And now I just feel us growing apart more and more every day. Sadly for some, their story begins to head downward when they leave for the field. I hope that's not your story, but hey, it could be, it's life sometimes. You know, maybe yours is, when we went to the mission field, things changed. I don't even recognize who he is anymore. So whereas the ascending stories are overly positive, the descending stories are overly negative and they're laced with victim speech at the hands of other people or circumstances.
You know, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these three ways of telling a story, right? You can be thinking, well, that's actually what happened. That's the hand that we were dealt. I'm just telling it as it is. That's what happened. The thing is that neither of these styles of narrative increase our resilience as a couple.
Yeah.
They don't make us any more all-terrain or ready to encounter any new challenges or different seasons that we may live as a couple. Mm-hmm. Whereas the trajectory of the story that does make us an all-terrain marriage are the ones that are oscillating ones.
Yes.
See, oscillating stories, they don't hide from the ups and the downs, the zigs or the zags. And so in our analogy of terrain, it's the trajectory that recognizes some parts of the journey have been on well-paved roads, mm-hmm. while others have been on steep, rocky inclines or through deep mud and snow. Precisely the kind of terrains that make us glad that we were built the way we were as all-terrain marriages.
Yeah.
You know, we were going great until we hit that pothole and it blew out our tire. But guess what? Thankfully, we had a spare and we knew how to change it and we were well on our way. Or our ministry was finally picking up steam. Things were happening. And then the global pandemic hit and it all seemed to get washed away. But you know what? Thankfully, God gave us fresh vision. Yeah. And that we're now super excited about giving our all to. Or, you know, the person that says, man, our marriage started out hot. I mean, smoking hot. But then the babies came. And I don't know, things got a little tricky. Honestly, they cooled off. They got a little cold. But then you know what? The babies grew up a little bit. And they began making breakfast on their own. And then you know what? Saturday mornings got hot again. See, oscillating stories don't ignore the bad or the good. They acknowledge them both. And they have room for life continually changing. See, the bad doesn't have to stay bad. And the good is enjoyed precisely because we know that just around the corner, we might have a challenge to resolve again.
Yeah. You know, I think of the years right after 2020, the start of the pandemic. And like many missionaries, we experienced the pandemic while living abroad, where it was felt in varying degrees of intensity, I think, around the world. And in our case, we were in Peru, which had a really strict lockdown. I mean, Peru was intense. It had the highest COVID mortality rate per capita in the entire world. So many people that we personally knew died or their family members died. And we had to figure out how to do church, how to do community online like everybody else. I remember I left the house 10 times in 10 months. The first 3 months I didn't leave at all because Peru literally prohibited it under their state of emergency laws. It was certainly terrain that we had never walked through, as I'm sure it was for you, as we shifted, figuring out how to do ministry while feeling like we were pretty much on house arrest. But despite that, I have to say we loved our life in Peru. We loved it. We loved it with all its struggles, challenges, and joys and people. We were never moving back. Never, ever, ever, never until we accidentally did.
Yeah.
And I mean accidentally because we had no clue that we were actually moving when we boarded the plane in December of 2020 to come up to the US. We were coming back to get some legal paperwork in order for our daughter who has special needs. She turned 18 during the lockdown. And so we had plans to make some important steps for her care. We thought we'll celebrate our first Christmas in the US in 10 years. And then we're going to go back home.
Right?
Okay, maybe do a little target therapy to alleviate the stress of the year. So if you're a US-born missionary, chances are you know what target therapy is. Maybe it's Walmart therapy for you. But it's when you slowly walk down every aisle at Target, wanting to put everything in your cart, but knowing that you can't because your suitcase can't weigh over 50 pounds. Just pick everything up. You just feel at peace still, just walking around the aisles, looking at the abundance, picking up the things on the end caps and putting them down. So, okay, but never did we imagine when we left our apartment in Lima with one suitcase apiece that was pretty much filled with sweatpants and clothes to chill in, because we didn't think we'd leave the house. We didn't realize that people were actually going out in the US. So anyways, we definitely did not pack like people who were moving back, because we weren't. Listen, the pandemic year of 2020 as a missionary was intense. I know you all have your own stories too. But becoming a pandemic refugee and having to start all over, oh my gosh, with people asking us all the time if we were still missionaries, that was one of the most disorienting terrains we have ever traveled.
That's the truth.
People kept welcoming us home. So annoying. They were like, "I'm just so glad you're home." Like, did they have no concept of the fact that we had lived there for 10 years? And at that point, Peru was still 100% our home? I just wanted to be like, no. But I didn't. We felt dizzy in this new terrain. Like, what was north? What was south? What was life even? Culture shock galore. Thank God for oscillating stories in the Bible to encourage our hearts. You know, stories like Joseph, who goes from being dad's favorite to being thrown in a pit and becoming a slave. And then he's manager of the house he's in. And then he gets thrown in jail. And then he becomes manager of the jail and he almost gets out. When he interprets his dream and then he's forgotten. And then he becomes second in command of all of Egypt. Or we've got other ones. We've got Job. Job had everything, and then he lost everything, and they need everything restored back. Or we have David. David went from pasture to popularity, to caves, back to palace, back to running, back to palace. It's a little dizzying. But you know what's so great? Filer's research showed that children who are raised in homes that have an oscillating narrative to their family stories, they're actually the most resilient and best prepared for crises and major life changes when compared to other types of narratives. So we're not just helping us, we're helping our kids. Kids who have these narratives already know life can knock you down or spin you out or get your wheels stuck in the mud. And they've heard us tell stories of the challenges that maybe, you know, you guys as their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents faced, and how they picked themselves back up after they'd been knocked down. And they know that, man, hope is what you hold on to the tightest. Not when everything seems like this straight road with a clear path, but when the roads are winding and the rain is pouring so hard you can hardly see a few feet in front of you. It's the kids that were raised in ascending narratives that actually struggle when things don't go the way they think they should. Why? Because that kind of narrative gives them a sense of entitlement, that everything is owed to them and it should just work. And crises shock them, derail them, and they just get bent out of shape. They tend to blame others, blame themselves when things don't continue on in this glorious upward trend. They get upset as if God's abandoned them or let them down. But then if you go on the flip side, you're going to find the kids who are raised in descending narratives. And these kids struggle with having hope for better days. They struggle with taking advantage of opportunities because why bother? It's only going to end up in the ditch anyway. These kids can also struggle with receiving God's blessing and goodness because it doesn't fit in the narrative that they've been raised in.
You know, this is why the story of our marriages is so important to be mindful of. Mm-hmm. It's okay to be open about being an all-terrain marriage and recognizing that we may be in a bit of a dry desert right now. Mm-hmm. That's okay. But don't worry. We know how to maneuver this terrain. I know how to get back to your heart. And my guess is that there is a gorgeous beach up ahead.
Bring it on.
See, all-terrain marriages do not let the terrain that they're on define who they are as a couple. Instead, they know that the story that they're telling is full of adventure. It's full of ups and downs. Baby, we've been across tough terrains before, and we're going to get across this one as well. Mm-hmm. Because I know how to identify where it is that I am, and you do too. You know, we know how to keep our gears well lubricated by finding joy in the journey. And we know a boatload of routes to navigate ourselves back and forth from each other. Mm-hmm. And we know that even though this season feels like it's the story, the truth is that it's only a chapter in the story. There is still so much more to be written. So let's wrap this up, as we have with all the other sessions, by letting you have some time to go through some discussion guides together. I want you guys to know that it's been an absolute pleasure for us to walk with you a few kilometers and share a few things from our heart. So we certainly hope that this has been a blessing to you and that you'll consider having this conversation with other couples around you. And let me just finish by saying, may you find happy trails. And if you don't, may you find the strength and confidence knowing that together you're able to traverse whatever terrain that is set before you. God bless you.